Good evening and welcome everyone. This is Dan Winter here again for another one of our fireside chats. FractalU.com, cosmic, serious science and spirituality education. And this evening's course is about Therify.net, actually advanced plasma science, plasma rejuvenation science, and understanding advanced bioactive fields using plasma and phase conjugates. That's what tonight is about. And the beginning of tonight, we will start with some pretty basic introduction to what the Therify.net is and how phase conjugate, implosive, and refractal charge fields and plasma fields work, just basic introductory understanding. And then we're going to invite Thomas Geckler outside of Atlanta in Georgia, who has just received the Therify system there for testing and use with some medical people that Thomas works with. Also, Thomas is a naturopath himself and has a lot of background in the healing fields. And so Thomas will share some of his experiences getting started with Therify there. We'll see his toys there. It's all good. And then we have a pretty advanced and somewhat esoteric conversation. First, we'll talk about Therify plasma and some of its other uses besides just conventional healing or bioactive fields like pain reduction, etc. We'll talk about its use for water treatment, for its use for seed treatment, potential use for stem cell treatment, and then more advanced, more spiritual science kinds of stuff, why it increases ability to see auras and how it helps deal with astral and plasma kind of entities and implants, and even understanding its use in terms of dealing with spirits and ghosts and the meaning of stargates and some pretty esoteric stuff we will close with. But we begin with more the hard science. So, first of all, we say that Therify is a plasma rejuvenation device, and you could very appropriately say, well, what is plasma? Plasma is, in physics, defined as a field within which the electron has been, quote unquote, stripped from the nucleus of the atom, which means that the charge is moving in a cloud rather freely. In fact, in general, you could think of plasma as a cloud of charge. It is notable that conventional physics is clear that plasma comprises 99.99% of the universe. So most everything that physics knows about is plasma. That means a cloud of charge. And it would be very appropriate for you to say, as Elizabeth Rausser did ask me once, what is charge? And in my view, charge is the fluid-like compression and rarefaction of the background media, the ether, as it were. And thus, when charge, that compression and rarefaction, rotates as a standing wave, that rotation of the charge in the fluid stores inertia like a gyroscope, which is the only definition and origin of mass. Also, that when that charge rotates, there's a period to that rotation, which is, in my view, the only definition and meaning of time. So charge rotation is the origin of both mass and time. Now further, we could imply that if so much of the universe is made of plasma, that it would be pretty realistic to assume that if there's intelligence in the universe, it probably travels as clouds of plasma or charge, as it were. And so, if God arrives here, the most likely media within which for God or the divine or collective intelligence or spirits or ghosts or entities and all these spiritual things, the appropriate media to think about their travel would be as a cloud of charge. Now, the other thing to say about what we're talking about here is that much of our work about clouds of plasma or charge deals with what's called cold plasma. And we have a complete discussion and background science on our work on cold plasma, fractalfield.com/cold plasma, notably including a description and discussion of our several trips to work with Dr. Keshe, and we work with many of the Keshe groups around the world. And the key part of that has to do with monoatomics and phase conjugators. And here's how I'd like to explain that. In physics, the concept of the cold plasma is a bit rare because it is normally thought that to have charge free, the electrons free from the nucleus, that it takes heat. So normally in physics, when they talk about moving plasma around, it is thought to be hot plasma. So cold plasma is something of an anomaly for physics. For example, in many cases, as Paul, our genius plasma engineer for Therify, has reported, in many cases, the very tip of that little tube here, if I put the very tip of these tubes actually gets colder, as did famously Schauberger's implosion vortex. So we know that phase conjugation, that is implosion of fields, has this quality of spontaneous coldness, which makes absolute sense, you know, because the very concept of negentropy, or increased order, is by definition the opposite of heat. So it's not surprising that if we claim that we're increasing order, that in fact the very tip of these plasma tubes has frequently been reported feeling cool, as in cold plasma. So the question is, what is it that enables plasma to move a free cloud of charge and yet not require heat? And I say this is a very interesting question because I suggest that your aura, your Ka, your boat to the underworld, your charge cloud, is in fact cold plasma. So your aura, and probably what you take with you after death, is cold plasma. So I suggest that it behooves us to try for a pretty clear understanding of what enables cold plasma to be cold. And we always use the cliche example that when Victor Schauberger was getting electrical wattage from gravity, apparently, in his piezo-doped water vortex, it always happened just after it spontaneously began getting colder. So the ability to cohere the vacuum and get charge from gravity, even Schauberger, the sort of father of implosion, reported spontaneous cooling correlate to the moment of implosion. Interestingly, we're going to talk more later about nuclear science, which is something that Keshe is very knowledgeable about. Implosion, the discovery of how to do implosion properly, was the origin of the atomic bomb, and they called it implosion. And notably, we're going to talk later about why and how hydrogen bombs get more energy than they're supposed to, and they do it by cohering the vacuum because hydrogen is implosive. And hydrogen's radii, I have proven, are golden ratio, and that's called a phase conjugator. So that brings up the question, what do phase conjugators do, and why is that essential to having a cloud of plasma not require heat or be a cold plasma? The example in this case is the noble gas mixture in the plasma tubes in front of you here. The noble gas mixture, actual mixture, is part of the intellectual property here, but noble gases in general are famous for being optical phase conjugators. So what does that mean? Remember, we said that when I say the word to conjugate, I always suggest that you visualize two pine cones kissing noses, so that if you were visualizing two lasers conjugating, as in phase conjugate optics and four-wave mixing, that when the lasers meet very precisely in very exact opposing directions, exactly like the two plasma tubes here in the Therify, and pretty close to the two plasma tubes here in the picture from Egypt, that the opposition angles of the opposing plasma tubes, if those angles are appropriate, and in front of us might be something related to the 72-degree angle or the inverse, or a phase conjugate angle. The famous conjugate angles are 90 degrees and 180 degrees, called four-wave mixing, that if wave fronts converge exactly opposite and they then bounce back, and it's actually sometimes phase conjugation is called wave front reversal for this reason, as in the magic of a phase conjugate mirror, that the wave front reversal also means time reversal, and that takes on a deeper meaning here in that the wave fronts are said to go backwards in time. And we've discussed at length what that means. It always means that they go backwards toward greater order. So time reversal in every sense is always negentropic or toward increased order. So really what they do is they seek their origin, which always is increased order. And that's why you can time reverse rusted steel to unrusted, but not the reverse. So phase conjugators is a material which causes waves to converge like pine cones kissing noses in a way that brings them all to an implosive center point. And all of our physics on this, our advanced physics on this, is in my book at fractalfield.com, which says that center point, that origin, is the Planck dimension, the Planck sphere. And my book is at fractalfield.com, Origin of Biologic Negentropy. And we say that when you bring those waves to converge precisely in the perfect caduceus or pine cone at the Planck distance, which is the musical key signature of the universe, and we have the graphic for that equation right here. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. So here, in red, I have the Planck distance. It's Planck length and time, and that sine wave in the center is quite literally the symbol for the Tao in this case, which is Planck length and time. And if you multiply that by exact whole integer exponents of golden ratio, you get this harmonic series, which I say is the origin of all biologic negentropy, and the proof or evidence is that it predicts the frequencies of the frequencies of hydrogen, and the wavelength of hydrogen predicts the almost exact harmonics of the Schumann harmonic series. It predicts the duration of the Earth year and Venus year, predicts extremely accurately the exact two frequencies of photosynthesis, and there are only two. And it predicts the almost exact wavelengths of the HF and LF of the heart rate variability, all of which is called phase conjugate collapse. Predicts the harmonics of the spine liquid pump. It predicts the frequencies of the Schumann harmonic series. It predicts the frequencies of the brain waves during human bliss and peak perception. So we say that phase conjugate collapse is the origin of all those negentropic self-organizing phenomena, and therefore life in general. That's the core concept of fractalfield.com in this course. Notably as well, that exact frequency series, which you can download and play with the sound at fractalfield.com/implosion sound. And for most of you here, this is all review, so I will do this fairly quickly. We've been around these corners before, but the software there, Secret Sound, at fractalfield.com/implosion sound, allows you to play with the psychokinesis of what we say is this idealized binaural beat frequency, the most psychokinetic, and it's quite literally that harmonic series, which then became, we proved, this was the frequency series that Elizabeth Rauscher used for pain elimination magnetically in her FDA study. And right here, you see in front of you, these are the frequencies that Priory used. Priory is the original inventor of the plasma tubes for cancer and other healings. Probably the most proven cancer cure on the surface of the planet, to my knowledge, the Priory device. And there's extensive PDFs at therify.net. So we started with the Priory ideas and we improved them once we learned the principle, which Priory did not know. But Priory was inspired by Lakhovsky and others who used a golden ratio series. And so Priory chose these frequencies for his low frequencies, 3 hertz, 10 hertz, 32 hertz, and 80 hertz. These frequencies are the actual reported key frequencies, low frequencies, that Priory modulated. It was when I saw that those frequencies fit my equation right here at these points, right here in front of you, that is the day that I decided we must build it, because now we understand why it works. So this was the background. So we're taking then these low frequency complex modulation and we cause them to meet in exact 180-degree phase opposition. And then we take a bifilar Tesla coil, which is the genius of my partner Paul, who's not with us tonight. We deliver about 500,000 volts at a megahertz range harmonic series to the high frequency end to drive the plasma tubes to light up the plasma. So we now have optical phase conjugation. And the point here is that that's in profound and exact phase discipline to the low frequency. So now we have probably the planet's most accurate broad spectral phase conjugation since since the Anunnaki did this and since Hermes did this. So I think this is probably the most accurate, and so this is our hypothesis of why the Prairie system was accurate and functional, and this is our mechanism for building the Prairie device, which is now Therify.net. And let us emphasize here that while the Prairie system was probably the most proven cancer cure, at least, energy cancer cure on the surface of the planet, the French government documented hundreds, if not thousands, of cures and many other health issues, restored negentropy. We do not and cannot and should not and do not want to claim that Therify.net cures or heals or diagnoses anything until we have proper medical supervision and medical trials and clinical trials. The good news is that all the preliminary evidence from all of our installations, and we're going from 4, 5, 6 to 8 countries very shortly, the preliminary evidence is all excellent, and we're getting the professional feedback we need to prove and show these things. So it's looking good at this moment, but we're doing this in an entirely legal fashion. That's our intent. And we're quite happy to do this in clinical settings with medical professionals. And Thomas Geckler here, for example, has a medical background in naturopathy and is working with medical people, including Bart Flick and others. And we have medical people France already involved in South France and in Belgium. And our partner for Therify Systems in Australia is Dr. Cornelius Van Dorp, our longtime friend and partner and medical doctor. And so we're getting the right people to do this work. Oh, thank you, Thomas. So Thomas Geckler is a licensed physician assistant, and we'll be working with medical people there. So we're quite prepared to do this in a legal fashion. The good news is that it's legal to use a sun lamp to increase circulation. And so we intend to do this safely, but we have what we believe is a breakthrough technology based on an ancient science. And that's the point, that we're saying that we think this was the ancient science. That, when they wanted to raise a Shem unto the Lord here, that the reason they came to their pyramid was for rejuvenation effect. And we're delighted that Sam Osmanagic there at the Bosnian Pyramid, who has 500,000 people coming to the Bosnian Pyramids every year now, many of whom come specifically because they have had rejuvenation experiences. And we're delighted that he's ordered a Therify, and that demo there at the Bosnian Pyramid will begin in June. And we spent last class on bioactive fields explaining the physics of how pyramids generate a bioactive field, basically low frequency, the Hummer, the infrasound, phase conjugate trigger, the phase conjugate dielectric material in the walls, creating an implosive conjugating centripetal field, broad spectral, from infrasound all the way to dielectrics and on up to microwave, the microwave, for example, of the ADP ATP of cellular biology, which we now know is a phase conjugator as well. The ADP frequency of cell metabolism fits my equation. So this was the slide from the Lakosky work, and we know that Lakosky here famously used golden ratio harmonic capacitance to create a profoundly healing field. So Tesla first started having high voltage blue sparks, and Marconi and everybody came over to Tesla's because they wanted to be healed by his blue sparks. And finding the healing phenomena associated with the high voltage sparks at Tesla launched Lakosky, who then built the Lakosky oscillator, famously used hundreds of systems all over France, for example. And the people from the Lakosky groups who have come to experience Therify have universally said that Therify is a similar feeling, except, quote, more powerful and faster, which exactly fits our understanding and experience, that we're taking a higher voltage phenomena and we're doing it more broad spectrally. And our hypothesis would be that the more broad spectral the conjugation, which is, say, the bigger the pine cones, the more rapid is the rejuvenation, negentropic, the more powerful the healing effect, etc. So this was just a conceptual introduction to what the Therify is. The hardware here looks like, well, this is the equation. Here we're showing the Schumann harmonics on the bottom, which are amazingly close to the frequencies that Prior used. And here is my equation, the blue numbers on top, and you see that the equation for perfect conjugation fits so beautifully the harmonics of the Schumann frequencies, and therefore the frequencies of brain waves that trigger peak experience. So we're essentially feeding the Therify with the frequencies of brain waves to create bliss. And in fact, a large number of people who play with the Therify report variations on the theme of bliss experience, peak perception. And I think Thomas is going to speak shortly about his. In fact, Thomas, maybe since I've carried on already, maybe would you like to, Thomas, to come on here and share a little bit about your early experience? So you just received the device there.
Well, I received the device a couple of weeks ago, and it didn't work very well. So we found a loose wire, so it went back for adjustment, and now it's back. I've had it for maybe 4 days or so, and I've sat in it each day, and I brought seeds down to it, and I have friends coming over as well, and folks are beginning to call and schedule appointments, which I'm absolutely open to. But I noticed not long after I started sitting in it, I thought I was imagining it, but I could sort of hear the bird tell me to fill her dish, and the dogs to feed them and let them out, and it's been you shut them up. And it's been a real unusual experience, because they've also wanted to come and sit in the field as well, and it is a blissful field, and I'm trying not to abuse it. I'm trying to limit myself to, I've maybe sat in it 10 minutes a day, and
well, why don't you turn your cam? You want to turn your camera on, Tom? If you
sure. I haven't had a detox reaction or anything like that, so. There you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn my camera off now.
Okay, well, there it is in the background.
Okay. Please continue, Thomas. So you felt a little telepathy with the animals. Fascinating.
Do you want to sit in it? Go ahead, sit in it. We're on. Susan Rose, she's also she's also in the class. Yeah, I haven't noticed anything. I sat and I meditated and asked for some guidance about where to send the energy, and that's what I've been doing, sort of doing that and chanting.
They can't be back.
And kind of chanting some numbers. There's a Coral Castle number and a Brown's Gas activation number that I use, and you can lock them in the back room.
Which one?
So you have it on now, there, Thomas. Is that right?
Yes. It's on. You can see it, kind of.
Right. We can kind of feel it a little bit too, I think. But
yeah, I can feel it. Woo!
Right. So it's accelerating your metabolism. You're feeling sharpness.
I'm feeling. I felt very, very clear, very clear-headed. I've noticed that, without being real specific, that I'm in my late 60s, and I have symptoms of benign prostatic hypertrophy, and those symptoms, which the men might know, but actually have gotten 50% better in the last few days. I've slept through the night. I haven't had any insomnia, which I was having, and I really haven't had any detoxes. I've been drinking a lot of water, but I'm a lucky man. I have a spring, and the spring is well known for being a healing spring as well. And so between the water and the Therify, it really has been a extraordinary couple of days. We've had some snow, as you may have heard. A half an inch shut us down.
It's fascinating, Thomas, because just the sonic echo when you speak, I'm feeling the buzz inside me that I usually feel when I turn it on. I'm feeling from your energy coming from your speech and the sonics there somehow.
I definitely feel it in the room.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, there is just one of us here after all, and so and this is like a coherence between hearts and between our heart math. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I think that's wonderful.
I think we're going to talk about how the mechanism of the conveyance of information in the vacuum for infinite connection is phase conjugate. So it is a kind of a DNA radio kind of thing. But that's wonderful. Thomas, do you want to tell anything more about your experiences then?
I really don't have a whole lot of them as yet. I'm hoping next time we speak, I'll have a lot more. But there's only been me and the animals in it so far. And because of the bad weather, it's been kind of shut down. But,
and did you say that you had tried a water treatment?
Oh yes, I make magnetic trap water, and I bring my trap water down here, and also expose my orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, my white mana powder, to the field as well. And I will say it's kind of kicked both of those up a notch. They're both pretty good doses, and will ring your ears. But people who have tried the irradiated products, and I guess irradiation is the right word, or treated products, I guess is better, say that it works. It works. They notice a difference.
Both the French and the Belgian sites for Therapy have reported very significant effects in water treatment, very beneficial, very energized. And so that's been pretty consistent. And both France and Belgium have reported pretty consistently that they're able to help people with localized pain pretty consistently, for example.
I'll leave it on here, but I'm going to move out of between them because it just kind of makes me kind of ditzy.
Your ears start ringing and it gets to be a bit strong. In fact, you might want to turn it off now.
Yeah, in fact, why don't I do that? I'll turn it.
And the interesting, if you turn it off slowly, you can kind of see the tornado form in the gas.
Oh,
yeah, that's right. You can see a little. Usually, if you turn it down slowly, you know how when you're degaussing a television screen, the way you do it is you put a strong field next to the TV screen, and then you very slowly reduce the power so that the power density at the screen looks like a caduceus. And so a slow on and slow off ramp are part of helping people get to the still point, I find, actually.
Well, I've noticed that it changes that from day to day, the exact voltage and the exact tuning on it changes a little bit.
Yes, and so you have done that where you adjust the tuning slightly for maximum brightness, which is the conjugate point. And
yeah, there's a fine tuning and a coarse tuning on it, and once the coarse tuning was tuned, the fine tuning is adequate. And it's so much different than it was. It's completely repaired. I'm so glad.
Yeah, there was probably the first time it was just shipping damage, but I'm glad. So people are asking questions about how to get your coordinates. Do you want to give your email here or something, or what do you suggest, Thomas?
My email is tgecks at Windstream WINDSTREAM.net, and I'll put it up here, I guess.
Just typed it in for them. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Thomas. And I
have a telephone number, a landline number, which is 706-867-8086, and a cell phone number. I prefer people call me on the landline, though.
That's fine. Then you could leave it at that, Tom. That's great of you. That's fine.
Okay.
That's okay. Appreciate it. And just to say a little bit, the plan is that Thomas is going to have this for some months or longer, and we're planning on collecting valuable results data with clinical and professional friends. And one of those clinical associates, Dr. Bart Flick, has extensive experience with wound healing and actually knew Chris Bird and his work with Priory. And Dr. Bart Flick is an expert on Rife frequencies and has his own Rife device, and we'll be collaborating there. And
I'm
Dr.
taking
Bart, go ahead.
I'm taking it up on Friday. I'm going up to Clayton with the Therify.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, just pack it very carefully. Be gentle, of course.
Oh, I promise.
Yeah, be gentle and careful, but wonderful. And Bart Flick and I have had detailed conversations, which are part of what we were going to chat about tonight, which was that he is something of an expert on stem cell science. And it was Bart that originally proposed to me that phase conjugators would theoretically be probably the ultimate stem cell switch, and that this is a very cutting edge and breakthrough kind of field effect for science. Maybe we'll switch video cameras now here, shall we, Thomas?
That's what I was going to say.
I'm going to put on my camera.
I'll mute the microphone here too.
Well, as you wish. You're happy to chat, but yes, okay. So I'm switching on my camera again here. Okay, so just we're trying to think a little bit together about the physics and science of stem cells, for example, and their relationship to the kinds of fields we're generating here. What does that mean? Well, when you try to get a conventional cell to become a stem cell, it's called de-differentiation. What does that mean? Well, stem cells are thought to be quite literally at the root of a fractal, which is to say the root of the propagation geometry from the perfect stem, the perfect branching, which is kind of the definition of fractality. So it makes total sense, of course, that a fractal field would be related to what it takes to take a regular cell to become a stem cell. To go back to the moment of perfect compression or de-differentiation, which is to say to become the envelope of all memory from which then the propagation vectors became the differentiation, which is cellular specialization. So de-differentiation and phase conjugators from a wave information physics viewpoint have the same meaning. So this is unproven yet, but we're rather confident that we will be playing a strong role in developing de-differentiation in stem cells. And this is something we wish to prove, and we're delighted that Dr. Bart Flick and others will have already agreed to collaborate with us in developing these proofs. Another partner in this regard is Dr. Todd Ovokaitis, who's quite famous. Thomas knows him also. Todd is also kind of well known now for putting together some of the most complete Rife microscope technologies on the planet, and we know the Rife harmonic series, which were recursive heterodynes, climaxing and conjugation, and the Rife series is part of Bart Flick's work. So Dr. Todd Ovokaitis is very involved in stem cell research as well, and all of these people understand that conjugators are conjugate fields are intimate to developing electric fields, which are called bioactivefield.com, which trigger the de-differentiation, the fractal field, getting a cell back to the root or stem of its propagation geometry, and hence phase conjugate fields, strong phase conjugate, broad spectral, like the Therify, should clearly, in theory, be a powerful mechanism for helping develop stem cells. So we're in the midst of testing these things. Now, I have an outline for the rest or the next part of this course this evening, which gets to some more esoteric conversations. Susan Rose says, I was sitting in for 5 minutes at the end of today's class here at Thomas's. So if you had any responses or experiences there, we're happy to share them. We just got back yesterday from spending a good part of the day at the French Perpignan Research Center with the Therify, and they had many experiences to report, so much so that that's part of how I got inspired to develop a bit more of an esoteric curricula for this evening's conversation. So now I'm going to my outline here. In fact, I'm going to paste my outline into the chat window at this moment, just as a way of sharing here's my little outline. So here are some ideas which I had in mind to develop this evening. Okay, so we talked about the definition of plasma and plasma universe. We didn't yet talk about plasma as a media for phase conjugation. In other words, since plasma is the primary material of the universe, as conventional physics would believe, and if the communications mechanisms, which we know are faster than light around the universe, presumably phase conjugates creating longitudinal waves are part of that mechanism, because longitudinal waves is one area, longitudinal electromagnetics, which is compressional waves, is one area where physics has proven that propagation velocities are faster than light. Notably, our phase conjugate theory of gravity requires that the phase conjugate faster than light velocities will be Golden ratio multiples times the speed of light, and we are in the process of proving that with work like Raymond Chow, who showed 4.23 times c in his measurements, which is Golden ratio cubed times the speed of light by measurement, meaning that we are probably right that phase conjugation is how DNA radio works around the universe faster than light. It is conventional physics to know, aka Tom Bearden, that phase conjugation is how you make longitudinals, as in the compressional waves that create plasma containment, which we say is appropriately called the mechanism of the flame in the mind. Remember, this all starts from how the plasma sphere of the Planck length and time creates, for example, the ratio of the mass of the proton to the electron and the radius of the proton to the electron. And that was the subject of our advanced physics course, meaning it all starts with conjugation down to Planck. In the process of that conversation, I was going to do a little, to make this evening colorful, I was going to do a little book review here. This is the book review interlude for the evening. This is one of Joseph Farrell's many books. This is called Babylon's Banksters, and it sounds like it might be conspiracy theory, which sometimes I find a bit boring, but it is not. It's actually physics. And the subtitle is indicative, Alchemy of Deep Physics, High Finance and Ancient Religions. And by the alchemy of deep physics, he means isotope transitions, implosion, and fusion theory. And he has a whole section, and part of his expertise is the Nazi bell, which we say is how the Vimana flew, that they rotated these conjugate media. And when you rotate a conjugator, we've explained in many of the courses, we believe that's how you make gravity. In fact, he even proposes that this becomes a theory of gravity. But in this book, in every case, he's talking about the originators of these theories, which he calls torsional waves or scalar waves. So he talks about, for example, Kozyrev and the Kozyrev mirror, which we've talked about being the physics of telepathy. And Kozyrev used the word torsional, and I say a more accurate term would be phase conjugate. And Bearden used the word scalar, but then he did use the word phase conjugate. So we're all converging on the same language, that when you create a compressional wave, translating the vorticity down to compressional, which is a wave that can be accelerated through the speed of light, you create the kind of gravity wave radio of the universe. And this then becomes a background for understanding how this is at once a communication device as well as an energy access device. So this introduces some pretty advanced physics, that if you apply these phase conjugate pump waves to the nucleus of the atom, you conventionally get access to the vacuum, access to zero-point energy, you get over unity. And so many of these over unity devices are basically phase conjugate pump waves applied at the nuclear level. For example, we think the hydrogen bomb, actually, the reason the hydrogen bomb gets more energy than the equation said it should be, was because it coheres the vacuum, because you're imploding a phase conjugate pump wave. And we now know that hydrogen is a phase conjugator, and we know why, because my equations newly prove the radii of hydrogen are golden ratio phase conjugate. And Bearden enumerates numerous zero-point energy devices related to this principle. For example, the Koski-Frost crystal. You had a quartz crystal cube, piezo, and you pump it with a phase conjugate pump wave, and it generates 800 times its weight in gravity, in thrust, in propulsion. And those equations and examples, with a lot of help from Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth, are all in the PDFs, all at fractalfield.com/propulsion. Pavo is asking, is the plasma inside the Therify tubes circulating in a vortex fashion? And actually, you can't see it very well here, but when you turn on and off the power very slowly, and you see the plasma build up in its excitation, you see a very definite vortex tornado begin to build from a 0 point. So yes, you see a vortex fashion, absolutely. And actually, the ancient pictures here, and this is why I think Paul and I originally decided that we were using ancient Egypt as the logo, because if you look, and Paul helped us do this, but if you look in the plasma tubes, which you know how Von Donigan says, you know, the ancient Egyptians had light bulbs. We think they had a lot more light bulbs. We think they had bioactive field generating plasma tubes. And this is the Egyptian picture, but you actually see this kind of shape in the plasma as you turn it on very slowly, and we're playing with photographic techniques to capture this, etc. So yes, absolutely, you get this kind of implosive vision in the plasma, which is to say, part of pine cones kissing noses, and the sense of the caduceus is even there. So yes, this is all part of the science. But going backwards now in our little outline here, once we understand that pumping inertia to the Planck dimension creates a longitudinal component of the EMF, which is the gravity radio of the universe. You know, gravity goes faster than light. That's well known, Hodowanik and Ramsey. So gravity waves, we think, are longitudinal electromagnetic, quite literally. And that's why you can make gravity with phase conjugate pump waves. And that's what fractalfield.com/propulsion is about. Well, what does this have to do with the Therify and the plasma tubes? It has everything to do with it. It has to do with stargates. It has to do with dealing with astral entities. It has to do with dealing with ghosts. It has to do with advanced plasma science. And you're going to say, well, maybe this is sounding a bit speculative and woo-woo. We hope to ground this in some very serious science and measurements, but some of this will be a bit esoteric. But this is a conversation we've decided to have this evening. This is our final class on the advanced plasma science of Therify. And so we're giving ourselves permission to be a little bit esoteric here as we proceed. So back to the outline. So the first concept was plasma as a media for phase conjugation. The next concept in the outline was why the Therify is clearly seems to be functional as a device for delivering trapped ghosts and entities. Therify is conjugate implosive living plasma. What does this have to do with ghosts? And why are we always talking about ghosts if we're scientists? I actually think that scientists absolutely must talk about ghosts. Korotkov certainly did, you know, we have that famous article here, which most of you have seen, goldenmean.info/immortality. And we have the picture from Korotkov of his measurement of what a plasma ghost looks like after death and where it goes and why it goes. And we've talked about this many times. You can measure the presence of a ghost, among other things, by measuring usually a cool spot, a decrease in heat. and this fits perfectly our conversation this evening, that what made the cold plasma field able to be cold plasma is that it's imploding charge and thus consuming heat and turning it into coolness. So it's not surprising that when a ghost wanders by, it eats the heat. And you measure the presence of ghosts by measuring a decrease in temperatures. It's classic ghost busting 101. And we don't mean this disrespectfully. We think ghosts should be treated with the same respect as all living, intelligent beings, with the same compassion. But in order to do that well, we think understanding the physics of ghosts is essential. It's essential to knowing how memory propagates after death. It's essential to knowing how to do death successfully. And it's essential to knowing how to treat astral hygiene healthily from a human perspective, both during life and after death. So the physics of ghosts, to me, is a very appropriate conversation for electrical engineers like me. So I don't apologize for talking about dealing with ghosts as an electrical engineer, because I think that's a beautiful science. So there we were yesterday at the center in Perpignan with Médéric and Christine. Now, Christine and Médéric are very advanced in energy healing science. They're in Perpignan at their center, and they're the major distributor in France for the Rayonex energy healing technologies. And Christine is notably, I guess you could say, clairvoyant. She has been doing aura diagnosis and aura healing for many years, and has now become very attached to using the Therify system, because she is convinced, and we have seen some evidence of this, that the Therify dramatically increases the visibility of auras. Now, as an electrical engineer, I think it's important to understand why. When you use the GDV, gas discharge visualization, or Kirlian photography to see the aura, the reason the aura becomes visible is because you use a high voltage bias under a glass plate. And the GDV, you're putting your finger on a glass plate. Under the glass plate, you have high voltage. The high voltage capacitively couples through the glass and creates a discharge geometry with high voltage bias. So it is quite literally the high voltage, high electrical pressure, which makes the aura visible. Why? Because think of your aura as a weak, high-frequency component of a charge field, but very very information dense. And so the high voltage bias under the glass plate in the Kirlian photograph, if you fire the high voltage without your finger present in the Kirlian photograph, or the GDV, you see a simple circular rings of capacitive discharge, of charge discharge. But if you put your finger on the glass plate and then fire the high voltage, your aura steers. And I repeat, your aura steers the direction of the electrical discharge, which is, say, the direction of the electrical discharge is now colored by, or navigated by, or steered by your aura. In other words, your aura is a cold plasma field which has the capability of directing high voltage charge. This is very important to think about, because, first of all, another thing that Christine and Médéric consistently report, and all users of the Therify consistently report, oh, Kevin says, I was conducting healing the other day in a hospital and sensed the presence of a plasma charge. Yes, it's basically a cloud of charge, a cloud of plasma is what builds when coherent human attention converges. This is important. This is what Bill Tiller proved, that focused human attention causes charge to compress. This is proven physics from Stanford Physics, Bill Tiller. But moreover, Christine and Médéric always report, and all Therify users report, that you get a lot of charge in your body, but it is critical that you use your attention and intention to steer the tornado. That if you don't use your attention and intention to steer the charge, the effects aren't as wonderful. So effectively, we can light the tornado with a conjugating plasma charge field of of the Therify, but it's up to you to steer that tornado. So it's the old story, set your intent. But now we have a much, much more specific understanding of exactly what it means to set your intent. Remember, you don't qualify to start learning Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic until you can put your attention into your baby fingertip with enough electrical force to cause it to begin to tingle. And that means the electrical centripetal force of the quality of your intention increased in electrical inertia, which is to say focus, to be able to steer bigger and bigger fields of charge or clouds of charge. So it's perfectly obvious that if you then close your eyes and set your intent and focus and steer that cloud charge tornado, you can direct it inside your body where it needs to go. It's quite simple. It's like fluid dynamics 101. So yes, we're getting a new sense of meaning to why it's critical to set your intent to steer that tornado. And remember, tornadoes always follow the center of lowest pressure. What creates the center of lowest pressure? The phase conjugate centripetal point, which is how shamans steer tornadoes. It's very simple physics. We have, for those who haven't seen our background, we did a whole major web article and process on how shamans steer tornadoes, goldenmean.info/dowsing. You see the shaman's bioplasmic streamer, which is literally his plasma, embed in the tornado when the tornado falls in love with the shaman, because the shaman feels the pain of the tornado, which is called eating the hoochah. Well, in this case, the plasma of the Therify is the tornado. And when you feel the pain of the plasma, which is to say, you feel the need of the plasma cloud to become immortal. All plasma donuts want to become immortal. They cry and weep if they cannot. And the way they get that way is become phase conjugate or fractal. So to say you're feeling the pain of the tornado, so the tornado falls in love with you, you're feeling where the tornado is bleeding charge. And that's called feeling the pain of the tornado. Very important to understand the science of this, because this helps you understand the nature of pain and why Therify is so excellent, with an excellent reputation so far, that it's very effective in helping with localized pain. Remember, the frequencies we feed to the Therify are the same frequencies Elizabeth Rauscher used to eliminate pain in FDA study. Why? Why does this create pain remission? Remember what pain is. Pain is the body electrically calling for restored charge compression, which is, say, implosive charge compression. Because implosive charge compression is what's holding your aura and you together as an efficiently circulating body. So the first thing a trauma surgeon does on a major wound is apply compression. Well, what is electrical compression? Electrical centripetal force is called phase conjugation, which is to say implosion of charge. So it's perfectly obvious the reason a centripetal massive conjugate plasma charge field like Therify would so dramatically be helpful in so many, perhaps the majority of cases of localized pain, because pain is the charge that's bleeding because fractality got broken. It's very simple. Remember, pain is not a mistake that God made. Pain is an appropriate invite to restore electrical compression, which is to say by restoring attention. I see. Tobias wants to show us something, don't you, Tobias? Oh, okay. Tobias is showing us his plasma cloud. Yes, and the thing with those plasma things, Tobias, is that what you practice with those gadgets is steering it with your mind. If you get really good and things are really quiet when those plasma devices are going, you test to see if you can affect it with your mind, and many friends can. And the more subtle they get, the more phase conjugate. If the frequencies used to trigger it were conjugators, it would become navigable with your mind. So this is not, woo-woo. It is the physics of psychokinesis to navigate the plasma clouds with your mind and to steer the center point. Thank you. Mike Harris is saying, no time for toys. Please stay on topic. Okay, Mike. Well, Tobias says, I can't seem to see a pattern of influencing other than by physical approximation. Yes, it takes some, actually, plasma clouds, steering plasma clouds with your mind takes plasma that's just at that subtle differentiation point between a lit plasma and an unlit plasma. That's why even in the Therify, when you turn on the plasma device very gradually, when it just lights up, is a time when it's perhaps most sensitive to being steered with your mind. And that's why, for example, steering tornadoes is easiest when they're just forming, for example, or steering babies is easiest when they're just forming. So there's a lot of dynamics, because initially your mind creates a very weak charge field. But if you get it in great deal of harmonics of resonance, then you can steer stronger and stronger charge fields. That's why in the Gurdjieff tradition of the sacred gymnastic, initially you can't get the critical mass of charge doing a sacred dance by yourself. But if you did it in a group with great choreography with the entire group, then the plasma cloud of the whole group becomes so collectively coherent that you generate the critical mass, and then the group experiences a bliss experience that no one individual had the critical mass to do, which is an introduction to why group work is so helpful when you just begin the spiritual disciplines. So because there is a critical mass to these things, which is related to the critical mass of how the electrical quality, the resolution of your own attention as an electrical force gains resolve. At first, your attention is a very crude and unfocused. Eventually, as you train yourself, for example, as an energy healer, your attention becomes like an electrical laser. Kevin says this could also work with an EEG headset like emotive movement without the programs. Well, yes, exactly, Kevin. In fact, my Bliss Tuner, where we taught golden ratio and EEG, was originally very successful in teaching this bliss process, and we were able to move people toward golden ratio phase conjugate EEG. The Bliss Tuner is at goldenmean.info/clinical intro. But now we're in the midst of developing something much more advanced to use EEG headsets to teach this laser foci of the attention, where not only will we teach golden ratio alpha beta, but we'll teach the correct alpha and beta that are phase conjugate to Planck, and we will teach the correct phase relationship of the right-left hemisphere, which is the conjugating principle used in Therify. And so a far more advanced physics of psychokinesis will be part of our new EEG system, and we're delighted to report that Chris and the team in Belgium is helping us launch this new EEG system, which we have already chosen the hardware for, and I can say that Chris is part of the board of directors of Monroe Institute, and we will be looking to their collaboration, and it looks like we have wonderful new commercial support to develop a whole new order of magnitude of powerful EEG biofeedback to create this tuned bliss psychokinesis, flame in the mind, plasma projection experience using brainwave biofeedback. So more to come on that. And that will be a sequel to our launch of the new heart rate variability app, which has all kinds of implications for caduceus conjugate implosion in the heart and breath training. And accompanying that soon will be the brainwave version, which is coming. Thank you. So back to our outline for this evening's course here. So what does this have to do with delivering trapped ghosts and entities? What Karatkoff found was that a ghost in a room always goes to the place of charge compression, which in Karatkoff's terms is related to how he measured sacred space. Sacred space, for example, where Kogis went to make phone calls to ancestors, we've talked about many times, and Karatkoff then measured the electrical quality of the air, which defined sacred space, enabling ancestral phone calls. And basically what he discovered was simple. He discovered that sacred space and ancestral phone calls, which is a communion of saints and collective unconscious, correspond to an electrical space where charge distribution efficiency is gained, which is to say, fractal air. And we now know that's exactly what's created by phase conjugators like the Therify. So effectively, you create this focused implosion point for charge in the room, which is why Therify feels like a sacred church. And it's true, if you go into a really sacred space like the underground crypt here at Michel de Cuichy in South France, or Martin de Canigou, the underground toroidal stone crypt where your hair stands up, that's what Therify feels like. It feels like intense electrical sacred space, which is to say, when Korotkov measured electrically what sacred space was, and you can see this at goldenmean.info/architecture, he measured a place where a spark can be so efficiently distributed. Effectively, a spark is in heaven in sacred space, Hey Ave, where the breath of charge takes flight. A spark is in heaven there because its charge can be efficiently distributed. It's like sonically a place where echoes are easy. Look, if you're a sound and you want to live forever, you're looking for the perfect echo. Introduction to Gurdjieff Movie 101, Meetings with Remarkable Men. The shaman is the one who knows how to make the perfect echo. Well, sacred space for charge is a perfect echo, quite literally. So, to enter sacred space, you need to find a place where echoes are easily created, not just sonically, but also electrically, capacitively. And that's what Korotkov measured, which corresponds beautifully to what we measured in our, we use this to measure it. We analyzed the capacitance of the air in Spectrum Analyze and did something a lot more expensive than what Korotkov did and came to the same results at goldenmean.info/biophoton. So we take this device and we connect it to a brainwave microvolt amplifier and spectrum analyzer, and the harmonic inclusiveness, which is the charge echoes of the air, and then we put this device onto Korotkov's antenna, which he calls Sputnik, which he uses to measure sacred space. And we found we're measuring the same thing. And Korotkov and I did that together, and we nodded to each other and says, yep, we're measuring the same thing. And we get along great with Dr. K. So, effectively, in order to embed yourself into perfectly distributed charge, people run around the planet and spend billions of dollars looking for sacred space. Well, that's all very cool. Everyone wants a stone circle, a Stonehenge, a pyramid. You know, the trek to find sacred space is the tourist industry of planet Earth. Well, this is appropriate because everyone knows unconsciously, if I don't get immortal, I'm toast. And everyone knows unconsciously that unless I find a place in which my aura charge distribution can become infinite, I do not get immortal. So I need to find that Stargate, that sacred space, that place in which I can commune with the collective unconscious, then the place from which I can make phone calls to my ancestors has tremendous survival value. So seeking sacred space is the tourist industry of planet Earth. All very cool. And the people who wrote the book, Gray wrote the book, Power of Place, for example, or wrote the book, Sacred Sites. I say this is wonderful. And even the people who wrote the book, Seeds of Knowledge, saying, oh, if you want to get your seeds to have 50% greater germination, all you have to do is get on a jet and find sacred space, Stonehenge, and we can treat your seeds. I say, however, as an electrical engineer, maybe we can save money on jet airline tickets if we learn how to make that electric field. In fact, maybe we can teach the pure principle. So that's what we're here for this evening. What is sacred space? Why is it that Therify creates it? How is it that we create it? And how does that create a way home for ghosts, which is to say, probably a location for successful birth and death, which is what many of these sacred sites were used for. what is successful birth and death electrically, and what does this have to do with the way home for ghosts? Well, it's simple. Living plasma or charge needs a place where perfect embedding is possible. And let's just say perfect nesting, perfect charge distribution, which is the definition of the term divine, to be perfectly branched. And thus the definition of word scion, which comes from the word to branch perfectly, which is the origin of the term science or philosophy, philosophy. It all has the same semantic root because it all has the same electrical root. Even the word eon, John, the oral transmission line of John, which means the perfect branching. It's all about perfect embedding and charge distribution. So Therify creates a place where ghosts can gain the implosive propagation, critical acceleration to embed themselves in a collective unconscious. Literally, to join the collectivizing DNA radio biphase conjugating. It's famous, when a really powerful charged person enters a room with lots of ghosts, all the ghosts climb onto the person who has the most charge and say, send me home, send me home, send me home. Everybody who deals with ghosts report the same phenomena. It's called space clearing. And we did that work for years with Eric Dowsett. So the ghost is looking for the maximum charge because that'll create the place of maximum distribution. So it makes total sense that the Therify can create the space. Now, obviously, and this is what was reported to us by the shamanic group, Chris and Medrick, and they're working with Jan Lipnik here in South France, who's very famous for teaching advanced geobiology and dealing with spirits and entities. Also, they reported in a detailed conversation, and there'll be more about this in Christine's blog. And stay tuned, this very detailed blog from Christine, and one also, Christine in South France, Christine is the clairvoyant who does aura healing, and she does clairvoyant artwork as well. And many people have had beautiful healing experiences with Christine there at the Therify, helping to steer the charge and helping people direct their intent. And in parallel, Peter in Belgium, who uses his hands more actively because he's a chiropractor, basically a healer, and he uses his hands on the table with the Therify and does these amazing healing sessions. And both of these blogs and their reports will soon be available at therify.net with their detailed reports. And one of the stories there will include the one from Christine yesterday, who told us about finding this very powerful and strong, I guess you could call it, some people call it tag or astral implant or etheric implant, or basically a plasma parasite in the aura. It was very strong, and they were having a lot of difficulty dealing with it. And these are pretty advanced people. Remember, I said we might talk about some esoteric things tonight. She talked about the origin of this implant in past lives, and it was quite an esoteric conversation. But what they were clear about was finally their guides, whom they worked with, were clear that the Therify would help them to deal with this astral implant. And they witnessed it quite literally breaking up in the intense charge of the plasma of the Therify. And so they quite clearly saw that the Therify conjugate plasma field was a powerful tool for dealing with astral implants. Now, again, I would strongly suggest working with people who have shamanic skills and who are experienced in looking at and dealing with these things. But clearly, we can see how the right high frequencies can break up parasitic entities. And this is, I do want to try to speak about, at least in general terms, the more general principle of why it is that parasitic entities are more susceptible to phase conjugators. It's parallel to this. Everyone knows, it's old news, that a cancerous material in the cell is most susceptible to heat. So cancer material in living cells is famous for being fastest to be killed by heat. So if you can deliver spin density to the site of the cancer itself, you can most effectively deal with the cancer. And incidentally, Bob Zawada, my teacher for phase conjugate optics at Roswell Park in Buffalo, clearly reported to me that when they were using lasers to switch on and off medicines at cancer sites inside human bodies, that the most non-heat generating frequencies for delivering laser lights in to treat cancer was to use golden ratio frequencies of laser optics, golden ratio colors, basically. If they use golden ratio frequencies with lasers when focusing laser light on cancer medicines, they generated the least amount of heat and therefore the best cold plasma and the best treatment. This was a detailed study done by their Robert Zawada, University of Buffalo, and Roswell Park Memorial Cancer Institute, Buffalo. What does this tell us about why parasitic materials in general are the first to die if you create spin density? This is the question. First of all, we are saying here that the climax form of spin density is phase conjugate or fractal. In other words, the way the Planck dimension, for example, gets maximum spin is by phase conjugation. That's our whole physics. That's the entire class on fractal physics, is the fact that the spin density at the level of Planck, which creates the gravity radio around the universe, is all based on phase conjugation, because that's how gravity is created. This is our physics. And by the way, if you change the word scalar and torsional to phase conjugation in this book, Joseph Farrell is agreeing that's how gravity is created. So if that's true, that spin density is optimized by phase conjugation. And it's obvious because the spin can't survive unless it's fractal. Otherwise, it creates destructive interference. So the spin density at the focal point has to be phase conjugate or fractal. Otherwise, the spin would bleed. So why is it that spin density, that parasites are first to die when spin gets dense? This is fundamental. Remember, we said we've been teaching this in our course on, science of bliss for 20 years now. We've always said that if you have a source of bliss, a consistent source of bliss process, your sacred dance, follow your bliss, whatever your bliss process. But if you have a consistent source of access to bliss, you will not have parasites, astral or stomach. Why did we say this? Remember, we said that the definition of culture is if you know how to teach your young people how to consistently have bliss experiences. And we say that this defines culture, and the culture ministries on every country on planet Earth need to redefine culture, because it isn't the color of your wine and shoe polish and beer. No, the definition of culture is whether you have the skill to teach young people to consistently have bliss experience. And biologically, this is the defining definition of culture, because access to bliss process determines if you can sustain an immune system and if you can take memory through death. So there is no doubt at all that having consistent access to bliss defines culture, because it defines sustainability in general. And that's why bliss, called body polis, a bliss body, a plasma field, is the origin of the term politic. So the definition of politics, and therefore having government, is the ability to form a collective plasma body called a bliss body. And when a collective group of people forms the plasma cocoon of collective bliss, not only is that the origin of the concept of politics, body polis, but it is the origin of communal decision making. So it's obvious that if any group in any country gets a collective bliss process going, they replace all other political bodies, which is the ultimate threat to every political body on planet Earth. But it's also the only possible way to have true collective biological decision making that is a collective bliss cocoon. So of course, any group of people who starts to have bliss together is the ultimate threat to their local government, because they are a local government, and biologically they have to be, and they should be. That's why forming groups that have bliss together is the beginning of the possibility of collective human decision making, because it's what's actually biological fusion is for. And it's the only way in which a hive of bees can swarm is when their collective plasma, cold plasma cocoon reaches critical mass, and they can only swarm when that collective plasma cocoon is navigated by royal blood, which is, say, implosive DNA, which is able to steer faster than light and therefore be the navigator. So there's a definite biology to the possibility of politics, and that's the ability to have bliss. So why did I carry on, as I have many times, about the biologic nature of bliss? Remember, we have a curriculum on a suggested hygiene for bliss, goldenmean.info/conscious kids. So why did I carry on about that? Well, electrically, how is it that when you have consistent bliss, your body eliminates parasites? The reason is because all parasitic material, like parasites in your guts or parasites in your aura, is destroyed in the presence of phase conjugate implosion or bliss, because perfect charge distribution, which phase conjugate or fractal field is by definition a perfectly shareable wave. So anything that is localized or quote unquote selfish or quote unquote not pure intention is not in touch with a longer wave, which is, say, a bigger electric field, which is to say pure intention. And so anything that's localized or selfish or not pure intention is destroyed by pure implosion, because pure implosion is the ultimate sorting mechanism, which is an introduction to some very solid physics, which says that phase conjugation is the origin of negentropy, eliminates disorder, eliminates heat, and therefore eliminates parasites, both astral and biologic. So this is, there's many animations now. It was headlines in YouTube the last few days about how frequencies broke up cancer. We're saying this is the ultimate frequency signature for breaking up cancer, because it is a frequency signature that breaks up any wave which is not sustainable. Remember, we're saying sustainability by definition is phase conjugation, because phase conjugation by definition is negentropy, and self-organization is the definition of sustainability. So a bit of a tautology, but it does all fit together beautifully. Tobias is talking about collective bliss at the carnival. That's fun. Yes, and Susan Rose is talking about Gautama is very high in gold and quartz crystal. In other words, it's highly piezo, so very susceptible too. It's wonderful. And Thomas Geckler is mentioning that he is on a sacred Cherokee sacred Cherokee site, which was where our community was, on a Cherokee sacred site there in Waynesville, North Carolina. And the Cherokee word for Ophanim, Adawi, was basically Ophanim, the whirling one, angel body. So there's a whole history of this. Thank you. And thank you, Robert, for pointing out the Nagual and the tonal, which is the Castaneda story of the implosive energy source within the culture, like the Bee Queen. And the Nagual and the tonal was like the implicate versus explicate order, quite literally. And what the difference between implicate and explicate order in the physics story of the perfect implicate order relates to Nagual and the tonal in the exact same sense that where charge is moving as a cloud, that would be implicate order, the Nagual, the ambience, the ether. But where charge has converged from a wave into a wave node, which is to say a wave envelope, sometimes called mass, that is the explicate order. So when the charge is rotating as a wave in the cloud, it's an implicate order, it's the Nagual. But when it converges into wave envelope storing inertia, which is the definition of mass, then it's called the explicate order, and that's the tonal. So the tonal versus the Nagual versus the implicate versus the explicate is actually about charge compression, literally, quite literally, how mass is created from energy. And Mark was talking about an energy code. Yes, Mark was using some energy codes for invocations in the Therify. And I'm sorry, Tom. Thomas could say more about that if he likes. So we are going down our list on tonight's curriculum. And we have said a little bit about how Therify is related to plasma entities and ghosts. And the next little thing on our list was the meaning of what it is to have or to be a Stargate. Remember that Anton Parks is saying among the ancients, a site like Jerusalem. Jerusalem actually was Uru Asa El M, meaning Uru means the lineage of ancient sacred dragon blood, literally the winged dragon ancestral line, the origin, as in ages of Uras, our ancestrals. The Asa means the queen or royal of, Uru Asa. The El means the place of the phase shift, as in Elimsport in Pennsylvania, where the L's went to be ported. So Uru Asa LM was the place where the royal of the ancient dragon ones made the phase translation of vorticity, the El as in Elohim. And now we know much more accurately what that means, that if you make the El or the phase shift as in Elohim, it means that your charge inertia can travel down the golden spiral called translation of vorticity in hydrodynamics, where the transverse wave is translated without energy loss into the longitudinal and therefore faster than light component. And hence you're able to make the L or phase shift and become Elohim. And so that's how phase conjugation creates longitudinal, superluminal. And that's how you go through a Stargate, meaning it's how your charge is translated into the longitudinal superlunar radio of the universe, which is a phase conjugate fractal. So what is a Stargate? We're beginning to have a clue. First of all, the ancient term for this is Dharana, and Anton Parks is clear. Most of the wars of the ancients are over access to the Stargate. This sounds like Groundhog Day to me, because today most of the wars are over Jerusalem, which is, we now know, an ancient Stargate. Well, why were the wars taking place over the Stargates? Because, as Anton Parks describes, everyone knew that basically you were stuck in a kindergarten a long way from downtown unless you got a ticket to the Stargate. It sounds like a jetport, doesn't it? In other words, of course, if the airport is shut down and you're stuck in no man's land, you're ready to go to war to get access to the airport. Well, in this case, the airport is the Stargate. And the Stargate is the place where your plasma can go through the heart of the sun and become distributed. Otherwise, you're stuck in a kindergarten a long way from downtown, and that ain't fun. So it makes total sense that every time you had a war among the ancients, it was for access to Dharana. Okay, so maybe now we'll get a little more insight into the origin of the war over Jerusalem, and hence might be able to end the religion wars. Yes, no, Robert. See, Roberts is saying without requiring the discipline of bliss, question mark. Robert, you've asked the right question. You see, we now understand that even if you got a ticket and got into the Stargate, maybe you won the war and you got to the Stargate, cool. Do you get to launch your plasma interstellar? It's not automatic. You need to have your DNA, your plasma, up to speed. And let me give you some examples. First of all, when Akhenaten, just before he changed his name to Moses and started to become a gold powder cook to found the Essenes, and his kid probably became Jesus Tut, if you believe Lawrence Gardner's good historical scholarship on the Egyptian origins of the Christian tradition, the book Out of Egypt by Ahmed Osman, that Akhenaten screwed up his assignment from the Syrians with the advanced, which was to build a Stargate called Amenti, Amarna, which was a fractal phase conjugate plasma accelerator solar temple implosive Dharana or Stargate. And what the purpose of this was, that they knew that the sun here burps regularly and much of the life gets toasted. And so if you don't have access to a Stargate, you could be stuck in a kindergarten melting a long way from downtown. So the Syrians said, get your show together, build us a Amenti Amarna, and they called it the Amun, the sun god. Atun was the sun god. Atun was Enki's Hermes lineage, and Amun was Enlil. There was the Atun Amun story. And the Amun priests were addicted to mushrooms, and the Atun priests used the soma, the acacia, for their bliss process. Different kind of bliss. The Amun and Enlil priests were more addictive to the mushroom, actually, for their bliss mechanic. Anyway, but then if you could have a collective bliss process in the solar temple, the plasma accelerator, otherwise known as Dharana or Stargate, then your soul group, who hopefully had practiced lucid dreaming as one body, then and only then did they have the electrical skill and phase coherence to be plasma accelerated as one, taking Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun, as it were. And so, no, it took a lot of phase discipline to do the plasma acceleration at the Stargate. And conventionally, that meant you need to be a royal or a quote-unquote god. But now we know exactly what they meant by gods among the ancients. They meant the ones who had plasma coherence in their aura. That's what it meant to be a god. It means you could steer a tornado. So what Lucifer, I think he meant when he said you two can be gods, he meant you can get your aura together and steer your plasma too. Well, initially, a soul group was required for plasma acceleration. Now, advanced beings like Osiris, for example, they could be plasma accelerated individually. That would be the concept. But clearly, you need a lot of phase coherence in the aura. This reminds me of another story. That could be my bumper sticker. Reminds me of another story. When Billy Myers, with working with the Pleiadians, we now know the Pleiadians were where Enki's family came from. The Pleiadians were interventionists, but every indigenous tribe knows that the ancestors were Pleiadian. But when Billy Myers was playing with them north of Lake Major, on the Swiss side is Billy Myers, and on the south side of the same lake was all the seeing of the Pleiadian craft. And training there was with Billy Myers was Alex Collier, who later had the Andromeda material, who then trained with Phyllis Schlemmer in the Star Trek training grounds in the UK. So when Billy Myers was playing with the Pleiadians, they said, well, today your aura is broken up, so we can't beam you up the same way. Remember Beam Me Up, Scotty? Well, the dilithium crystals are actually lithium niobate, and they're phase conjugators. So the point was that if your aura was not phase coherent, then your plasma could not be accelerated in the same way. There's a lot of information about that, actually, in the Billy Myers material. It's a fascinating story. But the point is that once you launch a phase conjugate plasma tornado like the Theraphi, which is sort of introduction 101 to the physics of what is a Dharana or a Stargate, and shaman experience Theraphi as a plasma portal, and this will be related to the subject when Sarah teaches the shaman course on plasma science in another week or two here at fractalu.com, 7arrows.net. She clearly reports that plasma, you close your eyes, you see a plasma tube. It's a shamanic doorway. It's a portal. Well, let's see if we can get another intuition into the physics of these plasma portals, the Stargate, the Dharana, from the movie Stargate. There are so many stories, so little time. But I just have to tell one part of this little story. So after I got hired by Jurka Reisevi to be the sort of media director at that time of Gaiam, the largest transformational video distributor on the planet. And Jirka was on the cover of like 3 international business magazines that week, living in his cabin in the wilderness, and owned more multi-million-dollar corporations than I think he could name or count at that moment. And Jirka introduced me to who would be the director of our media lab at that moment, who was Rick Hasson, who was the producer or the director, one of the originators of the Stargate movie. And then we saw that in the movie Stargate, the symbols on the outside of the loop of the Stargate, the actual symbols used are Ophanim Enochian. And we had just spent half a lifetime studying the physics of Ophanim Enochian, GoldenMean.info/Ophanim, and realized that if you take a plasma tornado, a shadow of the spiral on a torus, and you index that, originally it was a tetracube, but if you do a superset index of the spiral on a torus, which becomes Hebrew Sanskrit, the superset of that tetracube is called a hypercube, which is, if you see the article, is the index to the symmetry of the Ophanim Enochian letters used to make the movie Stargate after John Dee, whom I have some memories of that story, and Vincent Bridges. Long story, John Dee and Kelly, and Vincent Bridges and I have that echo through history. The John Dee story is part of my psyche, I suppose. And John Dee was with the largest library on the surface of the planet at the time. Probably his mathematical expertise before he discovered Ophanim Enochian was the mathematics of the hypercube. What's a hypercube? If you stellate a tetra, you have cube octa. And if you rotate the cube octa, it jitterbugs, nutates from hypercube into dodeca. So in one way of saying it, this is the classic argument, a hypercube is when the cube is extended and spun at the next possible axis of superposed spin symmetry, the way 5 cubes embed in a dodeca, which is really the concept of hypercube and the physics of the origin of the letters used to make the movie Stargate. So, by setting these plasma vectors at the right angle to make the hypercube dodeca Stargate, you implode those vectors at the center and send the wave propagation velocity superluminal, enabling time travel, Stargate, and phase conjugate longitudinal wave propagation in general. So this is only hints and clues here, but you can see that there's a lot of good physics behind the concept of Stargate. Literally, simply, the center of sacred space enables form of plasma compression that becomes charge or plasma acceleration. And the permission to do that plasma acceleration is the central concept of entering ancestral memory, entering the collective unconscious, and in a higher sense, projecting your plasma through the heart of the sun very accurately, which we now know is an eyeball and an organ of perception, and the only way out of kindergarten. The only gravity being the heart of the sun, remember the Anu, an eyeball, with the inertial escape velocity in and out of the solar system. Remember, if your ETs arrive in heavy metal, you suspect they're from the wrong side of the tracks. If your ET arrives in a plasma ball that came from the heart of the sun, then you should engage in conversation. So, next item. So an external gateway is needed regardless. Well, most humans do not have the plasma density to accelerate through the heart of the sun directly. There are many examples. In the Essene tradition, we work with Grace from Mount Shasta for many years. You can read her story at goldenmean.info/Grace, who as an Essene saint experienced an intense bliss experience where at the lake, the sun set on the lake, and there was a plasma flash, and after extreme purification and ablution, she felt her aura go into the heart of the sun and was able to see through the eye of the sun. And we developed a whole group of shamans who did that kind of work of going through the heart of the sun with their plasma body, and that became the Solar Heart Community at yahoogroups.com. You can read some of those stories of many shamans who had those experiences. So we see that the solar heart became the center of that path of evolution of plasma out of the solar system. And we know the solar heart is quite literally the Anu. So it isn't so much as an external gate hole, well, maybe a wormhole in the vertical mode, and lots of words for this, but you get the idea that this kind of plasma acceleration is essential to the possibility of human evolution. Human evolution is the ability of plasma to graduate past the solar system. It's not even esoteric. It's simply how you get out of kindergarten. It's not escapist even. Okay, moving down the curriculum I had outlined for tonight, meaning of Stargate we covered, how Therify has been used to remove astral implants and trigger clairvoyant aura vision and facilitate aura diagnosis we talked about. Next element in the curriculum was why Therify is best when human attention specifically steers, which is a direct low pressure point plasma tornado. We talked about that. And next we're going to talk about understanding Therify's now proven ability to powerfully energize water. So this is getting a bit more concrete now, thank goodness. You didn't want this to be so highly esoteric all night, did you? No, but it's true that the Belgian group, and now the South France group, and just now Thomas there in Atlanta, all of our Therify installations have consistently reported fairly dramatic ability to charge water with the Therify. They were joking in Perpignan yesterday that they charged one bottle of water, and then the family came back and they wanted 6 or 7 more bottles of water charged in the Therify plasma because the effect on the taste and the feeling of the water was so dramatic. Very similar stories in Belgium. And Thomas has been experimenting with treating water and his monoatomic products, the gold powder there. So the physics is simple. The center bond of the water is a hydrogen bond at perfect phase conjugator, and those exact frequencies of hydrogen is precisely what we dump into the Therify, both low and high spectra. And spin density is everything to water. It's laminar coherence, it's flow form, it's sevenfold, it's the whole story. So spin density equals hydration equals solubility. So an extension of what we've been doing for years in agriculture at theimploder.com, making spin-dense centripetal force phase conjugate implosive water, will be extended dramatically now as we're experimenting with high-level sewage treatment, pollution treatment, and water treatment with the plasma device Therify. And we intend to continue that work. In fact, just this evening we were discussing, we're going to be doing an experiment with a serious water pollution problem of water polluted with nasty radon and nasty stuff by coal mining. And we're setting up to do a powerful experiment using Therify plasma to prove we can increase sedimentation rate and heal and solve major issues with water pollution with plasma treatment. And this is not new. I mean, plasma guns have been used for all kinds of ways of energizing water, et cetera. Well, we just think our device will be cutting edge in this regard. So we're just getting started on proving. Kevin's asking if bubbles are present after charge. My guess would be no. You might get a little bit of a tendency to show little charge bubbles, but what you do get is silkier water with the imploder. I know we get silkier water. You get water that tastes and feels energized, where you can dramatically prove increase in solubility and therefore increase in hydration. And which is basically spin density, which equals laminar coherence, which relates to surface tension and does have an effect on redox, and that we've measured for the imploder, and we intend to measure for Therify. But basically, hydration is the central issue of so many diseases, and hydration is basically solubility. We're talking with Mike Harris about even a problem with your back, so much related to hydration. So many problems are related to spin density. How long was the water placed within the charge? Good question. I believe the water charge was on the order of 4 to 7 minutes so far, although maybe Thomas has tried longer periods of charging the water, but it doesn't take too long. And in fact, I imagine if there were larger bodies, it would have to do with the closeness of the plasma tubes, et cetera. But so far, most of the treatments we're doing for any sort with the Therify is on the order of 3 to 7 minutes. And we will keep you posted on those experiments. And that brings us to the next question in the conversation, which was Therify's huge potential to trigger seed germination and growth. we've talked about this many times. I told a story that when I planted my little squash seeds outside this window here, had dramatic effect on the seed growth with the ones that were planted just before the big lightning storm. Massively electronegative, and the seeds were like, and the book Seeds of Knowledge, they had 30 to 50% difference consistently in seed growth from high voltage treatment of seeds. And we think we will have the ultimate device for seed treatment. Remember, in Seeds of Knowledge, they said that the stone circle was not just the solution to, the shaman and getting through birth and death, but it was the way to save agriculture in a time of starvation. And then Levengood and Burke, after the book Seeds of Knowledge, had developed high voltage seed treatments, and they were experimenting at length and doing great, 30 to 50% growth consistently in most kinds of seeds. But the duration of time you would treat the seed varied dramatically by the size of the seed, for example. So there's many experiments to do. But we know exactly now, we talked about this at length in the last class, we know exactly why a powerfully electronegative centripetal electric field increases seed growth. It's simple, because the seed is alive or dead if it's able to suck, and we talked about that at length. So if you can't implode charge and suck in your next nutrient, that's life or death electrically for a seed. So zapping powerful centripetal fields on seeds isn't obvious, and that's what they said that the ancient stone structures were primarily used for. A primary number one use for sacred space generated by sacred Shem, ancient dolmen, was seed treatment. And this is the evidence from history from the book Seeds of Knowledge. So we're just getting started in there, and we have a powerful ally now, our friend Jukka in Finland, whose company is already doing like a electrical seed treatment. And so they have all the facilities, and they're going to be working with us, and we intend to prove that plasma fields are probably ultimate form of treating seeds. And Kevin, thank you for asking all the good questions. Have you tried with hemp seed? Well, I can tell you with the imploder.com, we got over 60% increase in plant harvest mass with the imploder.com. So I strongly suspect hemp seeds are going to love this, but we haven't proved it yet. We're just getting going there. But yes, implosion and hemp goes right together. And Thomas Geckler says, yes, they do. Testing the pineal gland it could be interesting. Well, that's the thing with the imploder. I feel such a buzz, and I have had burning pineal gland so much as part of my Kundalini experience. So we know what that does. That's the center of the electrical tornado. So you see how these things all fit together. Good. Now, the next little part of what I had outlined for this evening. Y-phase conjugates are by definition stem cell switching. We talked about that dedifferentiation of the stem cell. We had that conversation in the fractal field. And then we talked about Kozyrev called this a torsional mechanism of telepathy. Yes, so what does this have to do with telepathy? That if the Kozyrev system used tuned microwave oscillators, metal cylinders, at ley line crosses at a distance and documented global telepathy. And I mean scientifically proven way to achieve telepathy. And then, which we now know, that the reason you use a ley line cross for the Kozyrev mirror, which is talked about extensively by Farrell in this book, the Kozyrev phenomena, the Kozyrev mirror, which we now know are phase conjugate microwave mirrors. So the mechanism of that telepathy was effectively conjugate superluminal, which is to say druid phone calls, DNA radio, whatever you want to call it. So then Hartmut Müller, in the global scaling theory, which is basically golden ratio theory, developed phase conjugate longitudinal instantaneous global communication, replacing all mobile phones. Of course, he got in trouble with the powers that be at that point. But he developed superluminal longitudinal faster than light instantaneous global communication with phase conjugate in mobile phones. So if this is the way your telepathy works, it's probably the way your mobile phone should work. So the implications for global communication here are off the charts. And yes, this is disruptive technology. It could, We could replace every other form of propulsion on the planet, every form of transportation. Oh, by the way, every other form of communication on planet Earth. Would we like to be disruptive? Yes. We're going to do this one step at a time. But it's clear that the ultimate form of communication is the superluminal component of phase conjugators. This means that if you set up these plasma devices correctly at node points at a distance, you would have instantaneous global communicators. And this could be done micro and et cetera, the sort of the physics of the Princeton noosphere, which we now know is capacitive coupling, which is how you connect with phase conjugators. So communications implications, we're just getting started. Kevin says, the reason I ask is because I did experiments some years back. The seed sprouted a foot-long stem, which I had to hold up with wooden poles. Actually, yes, Thomas, or Kevin, that we found when we were developing the imploder.com that North Pole in versus South Pole in magnetics had a vast difference, consistent with the magnetics literature, on optimized germination phase versus fruiting phase growth. Namely, the fruiting phase you see is an unpacking phase, whereas the germination phase, I'm sorry, let me say that again. The germination phase is an unpacking form of growth, whereas the fruiting phase is a packing form of growth. Remember when we said quite literally the difference between the north and south pole magnetic is a difference between centripetal versus centrifugal. So it makes total sense, and the magnetic literature confirms that which pole of the magnets you face inward is critical. And what we did find, and I can say this, that the imploder.com with the best balance between germination and fruiting phase growth, which what you're saying is the spindly, the long stem that got away, which is a germination phase run amok. That the south pole in you could get a little bit more in germination phase, but if you want a balanced power to grow in both germination and especially fruiting or centripetal phase, that was north pole in magnetics, and that fits what the magnetic literature says about using the north pole magnet in most cases on magnetics and healing, and south pole for only certain situations like on the thymus where you need centripetal stimulation. So that's another question, but it is very related. Thomas, we just treated some homeopathics that are now literally growing and filling with tiny bubbles. Yes, so Thomas is trying some homeopathics. Yes, so we do think that this will be a form of the ultimate succussion, just like the biodynamics finds the superimploder, the triimploder vortex nozzle from the imploder.com. Homeopathic, the biodynamics people say this is the ultimate form of vorticity for dynamization, which is the centerpiece of biodynamic farming. So again, you know, concentrated centripetal, which is to say conjugate forces, are a dramatic way to increase treatments of many sorts. And I'm delighted that Thomas is trying this with homeopathics. Thomas says, also notice the mana powder actually moving in the field, trying to levitate. Had to turn it back off. Too much of the day. Yeah, if you're zapping gold powder with the Thomas is reporting being over blissed, and I do say that is an issue here, that you want to take this in gentle small doses and try this a little at a time, and you need to process that energy. That's right, Thomas. So, thank you. Mike here says, Thomas, you're having too much fun. But really, zapping gold powder with this could be a scene out of the movie Avatar, where the unobtainium, which we now know is the gold powder, is the phase conjugate monoatomics, that the unobtainium is floating in the movie Avatar. And why do they call it unobtainium? Because, you know, like the gold powder, it floats when it phase conjugates. It pays its debt to gravity. Wayne says, I can't stop laughing. Kevin says, Thomas says, yes, there are side effects. So, and all of this acceleration needs to be taken slowly. That's why we do recommend 3 to 5 minute sessions. And as Thomas is saying, overblissed here. That's exactly right. And overblissed is an issue because when you have so much charge and you can't ground it, that's why serious needs to drink extra water, hopefully high quality water, and Thomas is reporting he has high quality, to keep you grounded. And you need, touching the earth through your leather and, real grounding exercises. And also, Paul recommends normal healers know various mechanisms for detox. When you conjugate in any poisons in your system, will be then dissolved into your blood, and your liver needs to process them. So that's why we recommend medical professionals, if possible, to at least be aware of the symptoms and the need for doing detox, et cetera, which is drink extra water in your diet, et cetera, to help your liver flush the poisons out. So we suggest watching for these things, and we suggest the sessions should be of modest duration as we get used to it. Okay, so we talked about COSY-REV. Next on the list was why phase conjugate pump waves solve matter energy access. Why that pump wave is the reason hydrogen bonds create more energy than their conventional equations allow. What did this mean? It just meant that Tom Bearden is explaining in detail how a phase conjugate pump wave is how you bring energy out of mass and vice versa. Literally treat the nucleus to a phase conjugate pump wave. And so we talked about implosion and nuclear technology, and that phase conjugate pump waves are how you convert energy to mass and back. So there will be implications for plasma containment with phase conjugation. This is some of the advanced physics. But this is introduction to zero-point energy access. And our implosionamp.com we used as an example here, where we're using phase conjugation to optimize parametric amplification, which is related to the phase shifting of the Keshe devices. Basically, how the energy propagates in the vacuum, it doesn't propagate in simple, sine wave phase relationships. The energy propagates in the vacuum in a phase conjugate geometry like pine cones. And so that means the energy that comes out of the vacuum is at unusual phase relationships. And shifting those various phase relationships is related to what's called reactive power, and using power factor correction to bring charge back into phase to make use of the power. And it's similar to the challenge of using current-free potentials in the sense of permanent electrets as a real source of power. You get a little voltage from a pine cone, but how you use that power? Well, there's a little voltage in the permanent electret in your microphone and in your furnace filter, and it's normally thought that that little voltage that's acquired by capacitive coupling with the vacuum is not available to light your light bulbs. But under certain circumstances, you can phase shift all of that inertia back into phase and make use of what was thought to be a current-free potential for real use of current and power. And this is what's behind the implosionamp.com project, which is making available reactive power and making what's called parametric amplification, which is an amplifier that basically uses out of phase waves in a reactive core, a perfect implosive transformer, which is related to the Tom Bearden MEG, and it's related to the Bedini recursive battery charger over Unity, and it's related to the Tesla charged shuttle oscillator, and it's related to the Floyd Sweet famous vacuum triode amplifier, which was dramatically over Unity. These are all zero-point energy devices, and they're all devices which use phase elegant, which is now we know is phase conjugate, phase shifting to bring the energy of the vacuum back into coherence and thus enable us to use the power of the vacuum like pine cones do. So there's a lot to be said about understanding how this phase conjugate pump wave brings the inertia of charge into and out of the nucleus. Because once you understand that the nucleus is there because phase conjugated created the gravity that holds it together, then you know why Tom Bearden is always telling us to phase conjugate pump wave the nucleus and we'll have zero-point energy. So there's a whole introduction to the science of zero-point energies, which is implicate in the phase conjugate advanced plasma sciences, and the use of the Therify will begin to help us understand that. And just on a very practical level, on many occasions, many users, including myself and Paul, report that here you have the bifilar Tesla coil in the Therify, resonating at 500,000 volts, pure phase conjugate frequencies. Then you turn the power off, and you go back and turn the power on minutes or even hours later, and suddenly there'll be this massive pulse of power. And in some cases, Paul says, just turning the power on, the flash that comes back through the tubes out of the resonating coil blows the circuit breaker. So he said there's actually occasions when he blows his circuit breaker without applying power to the Therify, because the conjugate Tesla coil acquired so much power from the vacuum. So you see what's happening, that if you get a conjugator resonating in the vacuum, you suddenly begin to implode the vacuum energy. This is why Paul is advising it's so important that there be positive available vacuum coherence energy in the environment of the Therify, because the Therify actually in part is imploding the vacuum where it's located to delivering healing energy. What does that mean in practical terms? It means the environment also needs to be conjugate. Avoid large metal surfaces, avoid metals in general that dissipate the capacitance. You need biologic material, avoid synthetics, avoid electrosmog. You need charged air. When you have bliss, you're imploding your environment. So you need in a high charge environment. Same thing with the Therify. And when you do negative ion wind therapy, Joyce and cell care therapy in Scotland proved, you must have an environment which is phase conjugate, which is fractal, which is simply to say biologic architecture. So all these kinds of devices, zero-point energy devices, Therify plasma devices, negative ion wind therapies, biologic architecture, they all require the same thing, an environment where charge distribution is efficient, which is to say capacitive coupling can resonate. And that means eliminate synthetics, eliminate steel and aluminum, eliminate electrosmog, eliminate dead air, and then you can actually have lots of ambient charge ready to implode. So the same rules that apply, the Sufi master says, go to the bliss of your Sufi master like you would to a lover, which means take off your metal jewelry, remove your synthetic and tight clothing. This is all part of the protocol 101 for using Therify. And we've started on a more advanced series of protocol suggestions for use with the Therify at therify.net/protocol, and we'll be expanding on those, but they have to do with these simple phenomena that you prepare yourself to go to the place of charge density, whether you're preparing for death or birth or bliss or a lover or Therify or healing. The instructions are always the same. Remove your metal jewelry, remove your tight clothing, remove your synthetics. And here I have these are my raw hemp trousers, which I just got, which Valerie says she doesn't like the style of very much, but they have wonderful capacitance. So these things that allow high dielectrics to breathe charge efficiently are necessary for the aura of healing and Therify. Kevin says, application of nanofiber, phase conjugate long johns, bodysuits. Yes, that high dielectric materials is a complete advance in clothing for lots of chi. And in that regard, I recommend people study our fractalclothing.net, and we're developing new business partners for fractal clothing, which is basically high dielectric material. Remember, high dielectric merely means a capacitor that rings so efficiently that it can breathe charge efficiently. And so high dielectric material is an introduction to biologic architecture and fractal clothing and sacred space. Capacitance that rings efficiently. Kevin says, have you thought about a portable unit to experiment in the field? Oh, yes. Actually, Therify right now is necessarily expensive, and I apologize for that, but it's probably going to take years before we gather the data and can actually mass produce this. When we mass produce it, eventually it'll be at a fraction of the cost, but that's going to take a long time because we have to document and optimize and prove. And normally these things take years, but eventually the cost will come way down, of course. And miniaturization is part of that. But even now, actually, the Therify unit can be put in your car. We have packing material, and the amplifier fits in the top of the Tesla coil case. So, for example, Thomas is planning on taking this over to Dr. Flick's. And so it's a little bit portable as is, but eventually, of course, we're visualizing pairs of light bulbs, which you can take anywhere. Absolutely. And this will affect attention span in classrooms. This will affect growth rates in greenhouses. This will affect churches. This becomes the way to create charge distribution for living plasma, and therefore not just rejuvenation and healing, but biological communion at every level. Introduction to physics of communion of saints, collective unconscious. Kevin says, how much voltage does it require to operate? We are building Therify in 2 versions now, a 110 volt 60 cycle for North America, and a 220 volt 50 cycle for Europe and elsewhere in the world. Both versions are working well. I would comment, however, that my new equation for the origin of all biologic negentropy says very clearly that 50 cycle, as in Europe, is profoundly more phase conjugate than 60. And we are finding to some extent that the 50 cycle version is a little bit more embeddable. And even the parametric amplification experiments for 0-point energy access, 50 cycle is a lot better than 60 cycle. 60 cycle is the frequency at which the voltage required to stop the heart is lowest. 50 cycle is clearly more sacred, and I think I can prove it. But I don't think Tesla understood that. Thomas says runs on about 50 volts the Tesla coil. That's right. That there's 2 sections in the Therify. The one section is a primary section which takes normal voltage in a normal amplifier, and it modulates the low frequency cascade, basically implosion sound, and then that's modulated on the other section, which is a higher power amplifier. And the high power amplifier has a rheostat, which Thomas is mentioning, which is adjustable from about 0 to 110 volts, which is the voltage range. And 50 to 70 volts out of the main rheostat at relatively high amperage goes into the main amp section, which is modulated accurately from the low frequencies, which are digitally synthesized. And the complex output of that high amperage, modest voltage, then goes into the Tesla coil. The Tesla coil is bifiller. That means it takes a single signal input and splits it into 2 exactly 180 degrees out of phase complex waveforms, in each of which contain the entire harmonic series at about 500,000 volts. Complete complex waveform, 180 degrees out of phase, delivered, the high end is in the megahertz range and megahertz cascade with high frequency overtones, heterodynes, literally an infinite series potential heterodyne. And that 500,000 volts then goes into the opposing plasma tubes, precisely conjugating 180 degrees out of phase. So the 500,000 volts is deriving plasma, and that's why you have that corona discharge issue, and you actually need glass to prevent corona discharge, and you need a great distance from ground for all the high voltage components. The high voltage components is the Tesla coil in the black case and the wires from the Tesla coil to the plasma tubes themselves. And naturally, just like the Ark of the Covenant, you need certain hygiene. You don't want to be touching that stuff. Actually, we have people who have touched the 500,000 volts and they were not hurt, but nonetheless, we urge absolute care and caution, and eventually we're going to build better shielding, etc., because there's clear electrical hygiene necessary. The reason the people were not hurt was because in the same way the Brown's gas will melt steel but won't melt your hand, if you have a per phase conjugate array of high voltages, it doesn't destroy so much because you actually feel it as a cool blue arc. But still, we recommend being very careful and not touching those materials. plug sockets near the vortex and is really potent. Yes, and this may be related to the Hutchinson effect. Clearly, the levitation phenomena, which Hutchinson effect is related to, we believe is optimized by phase conjugation. That's what our belief is, which is why when you rotate a conjugator, you make gravity, like Keshe's rotating monatomic plasmas, which we now know are conjugators. And we, by the way, John Hutchinson has been very helpful in a lot of these conversations from the Hutchinson effect. And I will give one example. Our friend Marcus from Germany had visited here with his crystal energy cells, very famous group, and our friend from England was working with Marcus and his crystal energy cells. Crystal energy cells, basically, he says, uses quantum dots, which are carbon nano related, and they're a vacuum coherence device. So supposedly crystal energy cells you place on the shelf, and it's a battery that never wears out. And these proofs are underway, etc. But basically it's a vacuum coherence device, crystal energy cell. What John Hutchinson discovered was he could use these crystal energy cells, which have these quantum dots, which is conjugate points, which are carbon nano. You could move these around, and you could use it to measure geopathics. And so our geopathics measurement project with Lydia from Athens, Greece is well underway. And there's a famous company, I think it's NXT, which is using this crystal energy cell to measure ley lines, geopathics, presence of underground oil, rock faults, all these things. So basically, it's a subtle way to measure the gravity field. So you get a conjugate capacitor like the crystal energy cell, and you move along the Earth, and if there's a major rock fault under you, the output voltage does a major dip. What's the physics? The gravity field charge coherence is coupled directly by the crystal energy cell capacitively. This is why the crystal energy cell is an example of a geopathic zone measuring device. Literally, charge implosion. For the same reason, the capacitive coupling to the Josephson junction at the Princeton noosphere measures collective emotion. For the same reason that when you're walking over primary water, a deep underground water source, if you measure the efficiency of capacitive coupling between two capacitors within, a micro percentage accuracy of how much capacitance is moving from circuit B to circuit A in a tank circuit, the efficiency of capacitive coupling is modulated by the gravity field. This is Hodowanik and Ramsey 101, where instead of $1 billion for Weber to build a gravity detector, Hodowanik and Ramsey uses 25-cent capacitors, and they were seeing these gravity waves of these star explosions all the time. It was beautiful work, Hodowanik and Ramsey gravity detectors. So the reason we can use implosive capacitance to measure gravity is also related to how you can use it to cohere the vacuum, because gravity is the charge acceleration caused by conjugation in the vacuum. Robert says, imploder question okay, Dan? Sure. Is there any way to use a superimploder to raise the potency of medicinals, like a glass bottle or herbal tincture? If so, how would I do it? The imploder's ability to charge water increases when that water is conductive. We've talked about this many times. So Schauberger's vortex or the vortex cone nozzle in the imploder.com are the same in that they work best if they're doped, charged with mineral, hard water ore. And what happens then is the vortex becomes piezo. Now, when that vortex becomes piezo, it has been replicably observed that seeds right next to that vortex grow better even if they don't get the water from that vortex. So the place next to the vortex in the imploder is a bioactive field if the water is conductive, hard, mineral, or rock powder doped, like Plocker.de. So an example of using that implosive capacitance, then you could use that to zap your homeopathics and medicinals. Much more powerfully, presumably, you could use the plasma field of the Therify to do that as well. Any powerful centripetal conjugate field will increase the bioactive field. That's the central concept here. And the imploder is a modest example, and the Therify is a more powerful example. But again, a centripetal conjugate field will increase the bioactivity, exactly. Okay, it's 10 after 10. Here I have been talking a long time. I got carried away as usual. Any more questions? So plasma science is the science of the future, the science of rejuvenation, the science of acceleration, the science of energy, the science of communication. It's all there. Phase conjugate or fractal plasma science is the solution. It's a breakthrough technology. And we would all do well to understand how it works. It's all based on this. That when the wave nodes line up in the dodeca nest called conjugate, what happens is that each one is coupled to the other so that it's a perfect tensor equilibrium. You know, when Bucky Fuller talked about tensor equilibrium, he usually meant Ecosa, but actually Ecosa dodeca is a perfect tensor equilibrium. And that means if you wiggle one node here, the other node in the dodeca array on the other side of the universe is infinitely coupled faster than light. So you get onto a wave node in the dodeca Icosa nest, and you can participate in the gravity wave radio of the universe, the ultimate communication device, which is the ultimate charge distribution device. That's the essential concept between phase conjugates and superluminal gravity radio. Tobias, why are the plasma tubes with the Egyptians drawn so large? I would imagine that they were having trouble getting the pressures needed. I would imagine they were having trouble getting the voltages needed. I would imagine, for example, that for Priory to build what we just built, it took electronics the size of a room and huge plasma tubes because he didn't have modern electronics. We can concentrate voltages orders of magnitude more efficiently than Priory or the Egyptians were able to do. That's my guess. Kevin says Venus. Yes, the orbit of Venus is a phase conjugator. That's right. And the orbit of Venus, therefore, is actually exact golden ratio exponent times Planck time. That's the orbit of Venus, pent recursive. And that's why the body of Osiris is returning there. Two sizes of people. Are they Anunnaki and humans? Well, that's another point. Very interesting, Tobias. We think the Anunnaki were 9 to 13 feet tall, usually, based on the 9-foot or larger skeletons found in Zoar Valley in New York, many ancient giants that were destroyed by the Smithsonian in Washington because they didn't want to have the giants, and the giant skeletons found in Wollumbin, Mount Warning outside of Byron in Australia. They were giant, 9 to 12 foot tall, red-haired, the Anunnaki Draco, and so they were bigger, and so maybe they needed bigger plasma tubes. Interesting point, Tobias. Do you know Doc Izzard in Zoar Valley? I don't think so. I haven't been to Zoar Valley in 30 years, but no. But my friend Franklin Lavoie found a Dogon stone dog head skeleton there in Zoar Valley, and talked about the ancient giant skeletons there. John Wong says, what is the difference between using high voltage such as Therify and microcurrent therapies for helping the body heal and rejuvenate? Well, I could give some examples. Originally, when they found how to make a superconductor out of a gold monofilament or a DNA monofilament, just at the moment of crystallization, you zap it with a modest amperage flow, like lightning in the DNA creating a superconductor when Daniel Brinkley did his near-death experience. So the Keshe group, while the monoatomics are growing, while they're growing periodically, they zap it with microcurrents. And what that does is it forces the crystallization geometry to be conjugate to center point, literally jitterbugs the cube octa to Ecosa dodeca. That's what creates the superconductive moment. So microcurrent zapping is inherent to the process of growing the monoatomic coatings in the Keshe tradition. So the microcurrent serves the function of pushing the molecular geometry to jitterbug from Cubic to Ecosa to create the phase conjugate relationship to center point, which is the quasi-superconductive symmetry because it's a conjugator. So there's a role for microcurrents there in zapping. If you zap a forming liquid crystal like a DNA thread or a gold mono thread with a microcurrent amperage just at the right moment during crystallization, crystallize, then the crystallization geometry becomes measurably superconductive. So there is a role for microcurrents there, definitely. Whereas the high voltage here, high voltage normal to zap a plasma in a noble gas to light, the time falling by its light. So it's pretty normal that we need some high voltage in the Therapy to ignite the plasma. But once the plasma is ignited and the noble gas is optically phase conjugating, then we cleverly modulate that optical phase conjugate noble gas with the optical frequencies. We cleverly modulate very accurately in phase discipline the ELF low frequency phase conjugate implosion sound. And that's how we get the profound broad spectral conjugation. Well, we need the high voltage to trigger that noble gas. Time falling bodies take to light. But in both cases, the heal and rejuvenate result is the result of broad spectral conjugation. That's the hypothesis here. Tobias says the Chinese are making many of the ion ozone generators for use in the house. Are they tapping the same positive access to plasma therapy? Well, I can say that the Japanese are famous for hydrogen nanobubbles, which are clearly conjugate implosive in very healing spa technology, imploderspa.com, and our partner, which is now actually fountainoflife.today. And that is clearly an Oriental tradition. They've got fountainoflife.today. That's the link. Yes. So they have the recirculating water through the super imploder. That's what imploder spa is. So profoundly hydrating implosive water, spin dance, and then hydrogen nanobubbles, which then is implosive, profoundly healing in the water, and you have this amazing healing therapies, and that's what Peter's Center in Belgium is doing. And he's setting right next to it is the Therapy, and he has amazing synergy between these healing devices, and they're all based mostly on water. Tapping in the same plasma access to plasma therapy. Basically, yes, the implosion therapy. I mean, the Chinese were eating thin film of gold on their birthday cakes. You know, they knew something. Let's see. Wayne says, helping victims of concussion with the Therapy should speed up the healing process. As soon as the victim can get into the field, many more uses. Yes, and I think there will be a relationship to hyperbaric therapy as well, because the charge density in the oxygen is what gives the solubility of the oxygen. You know, the reason you yawn when you go into air-conditioned air is because the air conditioner eliminated the capacitance of the air, and that's what eliminated the hydrogen solubility. And your yawning is a reaction to lack of oxygen in the brain. So if there's something to give additional spin density to the oxygen to create the solubility, which is what phase conjugate is, then that would increase the effectiveness of hyperbaric therapy, namely phase conjugate plasma. And notably, when the clairvoyants looked at the atomic geometry of oxygen, they saw what we would today call a helical lightning bolt. That's why oxidation reduction is a name for the fact that the geometry of the oxygen atom is a stairway between valence electrons, and that stairway between valence electrons is a path which is named oxidation and reduction. Non-destructive collapse for electrons is oxidation, because oxygen is a lightning bolt, it's a helix. Whereas the same non-destructive compression at the atomic level would be called fusion or alchemy. And non-destructive isotope transitions obeys these same conjugate physics, and that's another project we're in the midst of. Before a therapy session, what should one do to prepare the body for optimal effectiveness of the therapy session? Well, we have that whole protocol article, therapy.net/protocol, in which we discuss that about preparing your clothing and metal. And by the way, removing all metal from the body includes being very careful. We cannot allow people who have electronic, like pacemakers, in their body should not use Therify until we understand much more. And metal implants in the body, which are not electronics, like metal plates, etc., we've had some luck with, but we're still being very careful. Although we've been able to help people with metal implants, but we want to be very careful for heating. But other than that, psychologically, to prepare to use Therify, obviously, there's the issue of focusing your intention to really become aware. Maybe this pain is telling me where I need to place my attention to sort the root of the cause psychologically in the Hamer tradition. So basically the psychological nut, seed, slipknot root of the disease. So the more you can meditate on the psychological roots of the pain, obviously you can get closer and closer to that heart of the slipknot in your attention. So then when you go into Therify, you're ready to focus on that issue. Remember, with the Therify, we almost invariably get reports of improved decision-making skill. What does that mean? Discrimination ability, self-sort, negentropy. It means that as you increase the spin density, the ability to sort increases. So you're sorting out the slipknot at the root of the disease, and preparing that by focusing in your psyche to sort that is obviously part of the preparation. Does entering a religious light humble prayer intent mode affect charge? Yes, absolutely. There are many parallels to religious experience, and all of the conversations in religion and prayer about focusing your attention and really determining which ways are shareable and eliminating your anger and getting to a share. These all apply to the same way you prepare for bliss, you prepare for birth, you prepare for death, you prepare for sacred space, you prepare for Therify, all in exactly the same way. What is a shareable wave is the exact issue here. And we now know when you measure pure intention, you measure EKG phase coherence, and we know the climax form of coherence is phase conjugate or fractal. So these concepts all fit together beautifully. Susan Rose, the zipper on your pants, tiny amounts of metal that are unavoidable on the body, it's okay. I mean, when the Lakosky, like high voltage fields, are used for healing, where Guy Obolensky does this in Upper New York, they get in this partial noble gas and they have these blue sparks. They actually do it naked. And now we're not saying you need to do it naked here, but actually as little clothing as from which you can feel comfortable is good, actually. And then light, loose, natural fabric clothing. All these things so that your aura can unfold. Now, if there's a tiny little bit of metal in your zipper, well, not a big deal. Margie says, what about pregnant women? We're just starting on this. I would think you would have increased circulation, increased metabolic rate. We know we've measured long-term, like overnight HRV analysis we're doing, long-term increases in heart rate and metabolism. So for this reason, we would strongly suggest caution in working with pregnant people and people with unusual conditions. Try a minute or two and diagnose, see how it feels, come back a day later. Let's start very slowly and carefully. If there were issues of lack of circulation or pain or other things, that very careful preliminary short-term experiments I think would be good, even with pregnancy. But we're suggesting do this very gently and do this with medical supervision, and the doctor should know that what probably increases circulation and metabolism. This can help in many cases where, for example, a part of the body has lost feeling, for example. But, for pregnancy, let's say we're going to take this very carefully. Now, admittedly, we know that the physics of rebirthing is phase conjugation, that to get the birth canal that delivers memory through birth, we know that the maximum pressure point is golden ratio. So phase conjugate implosion is the point at which memory comes through birth. That's called you couldn't get a better squeeze. So rebirthing is related to phase conjugation. So, you know, why Caesar made war on the Druids, because he couldn't bond with his mother, because he couldn't phase conjugate. He didn't have a birth canal, no pressure. Wayne says, I would think stainless wires inside the body should not be effective. Actually, stainless wires would capacitively couple with opposite to a conjugating dielectric, meaning that even stainless steel would be rather bad news here. For example, if you're wearing a bra that has some wires in it, we think that's really bad news. Actually, bad news in general, but particularly bad news in the Therafide. Anything that prevents the capacitance from distributing efficiently is not helpful. And so, you know, any clothing with metal, or particularly wires in it, not good. John Wong, regarding the superimploder, does the vortexing of the water create the fourth phase of water? You know, the fourth phase of matter is plasma. And plasma is a place where charge distribution is so enabled that the electrons can be unconnected from the nucleus, similar to the triplet state electron. So the fourth phase of water, in my view, is simply a name for the place where the charge can be distributed so efficiently it can be shared. So in that sense, yes, I could say, you know, if in the superimploder, the capacitance of the water was good, like a little rock powder in there is fabulous. Biodynamic preparation, fabulous. Anything that we do great in hard water. So anything that we have with very conductive, then you can actually feel and measure the capacitive field around the vortex nozzle. Then you will be creating more of that beautiful plasma distribution, triplet state electron charge distribution efficiently. And that is, in my view, the definition of the fourth phase of water. Thomas Geckler said, I had a gold ring and a gold chain on my neck. No problem. Yeah, well, gold is a gorgeous phase conjugator, so a little gold there probably helped to charge gold. You know, the gold would be, yeah, thank you, Thomas. I think Thomas has a heart of gold. It's all good. Okay, it's almost 10:30 p.m. here, and my voice is starting to give out, unless there's any last questions. I think we had a little bit of fun. Eden says, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Hayam says, what about negative emotions and any mental blocks? No, you need to be good. Yes, I mean, just like going to bliss or birth or death, if you're full of anger, you're in trouble. And so getting to the point of feeling that you're relaxed, relaxation is conductivity, which is the opposite of tension, which is the opposite of anger. So sorting your emotions, if you're feeling anger about anything, obviously, you know, it's best to dissipate. Of course, that's what Therafide is for, that the most non-conductive places is where the apparently self-organizing plasma will focus on. Remember, phase conjugate plasma, Allison baryon titanate land, is self-organizing. That means it's going to go to the place where it's most needed. So if there's anger, hopefully the Therafide is going to help, but if you can get rid of as much of it as possible. So yes, positive emotions. Okay, sweet dreams, everybody. We had a fun night. Join us next week at Fractal U. We'll be going into the shamanic aspect of things and biologic architecture. More fun to come. And this film will be shared in part at Therafy.net. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks for coming. Take care. Thanks for being so welcoming down there. Thomas is saying, welcome, everybody. You can come to Georgia. Great session of healing. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.